Welcome back to the Nassau Hockey Podcast. After a 2-week break, we return the same day. Lou Lamoriello breaks his silence and speaks to the press, although I don't know that there was a whole unplanned?
We didn't plan to come back
Oh, we
today.
didn't plan it. I'm sure Lamoriello had this marked on his calendar for some time. He strikes me as that type of guy. But before we get into the press conference and some other off-season items that we have planned for June. I know you said this on Twitter, and I'm sure people know, but maybe the audience that listens that doesn't follow us on Twitter, I don't think we made an announcement through the NHP account. Your little announcement in your new role.
Oh yeah, I didn't know where you were going with that for a second. Yeah, I got a new job. I am now the full-time beat reporter for the New Jersey Devils via New Jersey Hockey Now. So pretty cool.
How do you see balancing that with not just this podcast, but like your clear like Islanders fandom, and like I deal with this in my job too. There's certain things I just have to like leave at the door when I sit down for work every day that are my opinion, and certain things. Um, I've done this a little bit in my hockey writing too, but for this is a little bit different. The audience is so much bigger. You show up, you're able to speak to the GM and the players and coaches and agents and different things. Do you find that balance is a little difficult, or at this point you're a full season and it's maybe harder in the beginning?
Um, I generally speaking, for like since I started taking the coverage seriously a couple years back, probably a little bit before we started the podcast, this weird sense of professionalism like came over me, and you kind of learn to remove your fandom, like abandon it a little bit, and just start rooting for other things like storylines. And one of my favorite things to say, and I wrote this in like my welcome article, you root for chaos because it creates good storylines, right? So you love that kind of stuff.
That's a Jeff
um
Merrickism.
yeah, right. And but other things too, you root for good people, you root for good players, or players that have been around and deserve to, like, let's say, win a Stanley Cup, such as like Joe Pavelski, who's been around forever, and makes it so far, but doesn't quite grasp it. And you just want to see a guy like that finally, claim the ultimate prize. So yeah, you kind of learn to remove the fandom and just, watch the game from a different point of view. Um, Keep that objective, you know, state of mind, and just, root for content, like root for good things to write about. And that's just kind of how I see it. And um it's how it's been for me for a while now, and I'm excited to be able to do it on a daily beat.
That's great. Yeah, and this summer you'll have plenty of time to dive into whatever odds and ends with the team
Yeah.
happens, and going into camp and things like that before the school year starts.
Yeah.
And this is where you can be a fan a little bit. I think we both let that out. I think we both really try to be objective and think things through. That's a comment that we've gotten from people that we both respect, kind of in the Islanders media community, is our kind of level headedness in our takes at times, and we've certainly been wrong, and b
Yeah.
people have disagreed with them, and that's fine. That's like the whole purpose of this. Um, so it's cool that you're able to do that, and hopefully here we'll be able to keep that balance for you so that you can still be a fan of the Islanders a little bit. We don't have to take ourselves. I think there's a balance of like taking ourselves too seriously
Yeah.
and just kind of being genuine in ourselves and not trying to be something. We've battled that, I think, over the now we're ending season 4, year 3 of the show, and in year 3, I can't remember. Um, we've tried to balance, oh, we want to be like this show, or at any certain time, our influences are different. We're listening to different things. You were really big into like a bunch of hockey podcasts for a while. I don't know
Yeah.
what your time's like now, probably a lot less, but you were listening to everything. Um,
I
you
still
know,
do.
I, yeah, and it's just listening to 32 Thoughts or STPN shows, or even, for me, it's a lot of non hockey shows. I try to break it up a little bit and see how non-sport shows are putting things together, and I've been really hooked on Smartless and their documentary and the banter and how we can bring that to our show and different things like that. But this is probably wildly uninteresting to our audience. So in respect for them, we'll move on. Although I don't know that the Lou presser is going to be all that much more
I
interesting.
was just gonna say.
So perhaps I was delaying the inevitable nothing sandwich we're about to bite into here. Although, I mean, there's a few nuggets of mustard and maybe a pickle in there that tell us a little bit of something. And I don't think either of us are keen on. I think there's a difference between reading between the lines and galaxy braining some of what he said into who knows what. Um, we'll try to separate that in the show. We'll talk about the presser. We'll talk about the potential in the off season. We have two great guests for next week. We're going to leave that as a little bit of a surprise for now. Um, so some of this might be a little bit of a repeated next week, and some of these questions and some of the things, but that's just kind of where we're at as far as um, the off season before July 1st. We do get to Galaxy Brain a little bit in our own right. But let's start with Lou. He gave us the company line. I tweeted this a while back. I I think it was easy to predict. I wasn't even the only one to do it. We have to be better, committed to the coaches and players. Um, Goals to win the cup. Any,
Yep.
I mean, there's not a lot to respond to there. Um, but do you have anything to respond, or is it just kind of what you expected?
It's what I expected. Um, it's one of those things where it's like you sit there and you say to yourself, this can't be really happening again, right? And I get it, like they acquired Bo Horvat at the deadline, and he's like the major ad, and it's like, do you need more than that? Like, is like how much more do you need? And it's like, no, but you do. You still need another winger. Um, and so you, like I said, you hear it again, you wonder, can that really be how he feels? Now, you never know with Lou, right? Like he'll say the same thing over and over and over again. Like he's reading it off of a cue card. That doesn't necessarily mean that's really how he feels, right? He's just pleasing the media.
Well, he even
Uh,
said
could be,
Andrew
you know.
Andrew. I think it was Andrew Gross, if I have his voice right. Um, I think kicked off the presser, or at least what was on Twitter. The Islanders account tweeted it out. A chunk of it, maybe it was only 10 minutes to begin with. I obviously didn't get a chance to listen in on it to
I
begin
think it
with, but
was.
8 to 10 minutes is typically the length of those kind of pressers that they send out. Maybe like 12. Um, but he asked, why now? Why not closer to clean out day? And I understand the question. Like you have to ask that question, but I don't know what other answer you expected than what he gave, which was, well, first of all, he's not going to say anything in this presser.
Right.
You know, um, it's all speculation whether he says something or not until something actually takes place and he's sitting there announcing something. So I mean, to Lou's point, he was doing quote work between then and now, and he had a lot of word salad about him asking questions and getting answers to questions, and didn't want to take questions from the media because it wouldn't help anything. um so he said questions about 25 times in one sentence. But yeah, I mean, I understand you have to ask that question, but I don't know to what end. Like, do you literally just need him to say that? and
Well, I
and that
mean,
and that's your quote. But
and
this
that's
isn't
the thing.
this
Like,
isn't like a journalistic thing, right? I'm not questioning Gross or
no,
whatever,
no, but
but
at the
like
same
it's
time, it's funny because like I've had this conversation with other writers before. We'll before someone sits down at the podium or someone starts talking to us about something, we'll say we're going to ask this question, but we know we're going to get this answer. But you have to ask. It's just protocol. Otherwise, you're not doing your job. So that's just like, I and you've seen this before. Plenty of people, and Twitter is what it is, right? We all know that it can become a cesspool at times, but people will be all up in arms on Twitter about, oh, you have to ask the hard questions, and you can't let them get away with certain answers. And you have to understand, there's like PR people around, and like they won't let you go to a certain point if they don't want you to. So
especially with the Islanders.
especially
That
with the Islanders, right? They're one of the more difficult PR departments. They crack down a lot more. So it's not as cut and dry as you might think, right? Like, yes, we have to ask the question. Yes, we pretty much 99% of the time know the answer we're also going to get. But you have to do it. It's part of the job. And if you
yeah.
don't do it and nobody does it, and then you walk away and your boss turns around and says to you, "Hey, why didn't you ask the question?" And your response is, "Because I knew what the answer was going to be." That's not going to suffice. So it's an interesting, like, little conundrum that you're sometimes in, like, I know what the answer is going to be, but you have to ask, and it might get them frustrated to hear it. That they're possibly going to be a little bit agitated to have to answer it. But at the same time, you also know that they have in the back of their minds that they know it's coming, and they probably are going to give you some generic bullshit, and whether that is how they really feel or not is irrelevant.
Yeah. Well, what was an interesting nugget here was, and I was very surprised by this actually. It I don't know if it makes it worth it, but I think it's something that fans were definitely talking about throughout the season, throughout all the scratches, wondering what was going to happen, wanting to shoot him into the sun, etc. Josh Bailey. There was a little bit more on this than like I said, than I expected. Um, what did Lou say? And do you have any thoughts beyond that as far as what it actually means and what a deal could look like or a buyout or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, he didn't say anything such as what the plan was, how they're going to get it done, but it sounded a lot to me like Josh Bailey has skated his last game in a New York Islanders uniform. Um, Whether that means they trade him, buy him out, uh, bury him in the AHL, I don't think that's what they're gonna do. But he said we'll figure out how, we'll figure out when. But we're not gonna sacrifice the on ice product for loyalty. And I thought that that was a big deal. That if anything, coming
That's
away
what I
from this
mean.
one,
That's what I mean. I
that
think
one was
that
the big deal.
do you mind if I read the quote very quickly
Go for it.
about Bailey? He said, loyalty to me is a very important thing, but loyalty will never get in the way of impending progress or making whatever decisions I have a responsibility to make. Never. In Josh's case, it looks like maybe it's near the end for here in our situation. Josh and I have, I think, man-to-man relationship as far as honesty. We will work with him to help him, but my priority is doing what's best for the team. That's a lot more than he said about most things that he's actually announced.
Yeah.
Um, so I was very surprised, especially that as I read that a second time. Um, I think was surprisingly this part wasn't mentioned on Twitter that it looks like maybe it's the end for here. I don't people weren't I'm not like digging up. This is John Lane on NHL.com where I'm reading the quote from. So it's not like people didn't see it. Like clearly it was enough to put it here. I'm sure it's in some other articles too, but it wasn't like I didn't see it as a predominant message as part of the Josh Bailey comments. Um, but it does seem like one way or another. Big from Bailey's perspective on at clean out, I don't think he wants to sit in the stands. I think he made that pretty clear. So if he is sent to Bridgeport, right? If he can't get traded in the offseason, he might not report. I think he wants to play in the NHL. I wonder if he would even report to Bridgeport at all.
That's
Um,
a good point, and I think his comments on wanting to play, in addition to Lou's comments on, you know wanting to, I forget exactly how he said it when you just read it, but like work with him. I don't think that that means they want to send him down. I think that that means they want to send him away. So that's what I think ends up happening ultimately. Whether that means a buyout and he signs somewhere else, or they trade him. And look, like we can galaxy brain this into existence if we want, whether you want to believe it or not, and whether it costs, the Islanders sending a draft pick with him, I don't know, but I do feel like there is a place for Josh Bailey to land. Like you're gonna tell me the Chicago Blackhawks can't use an experienced NHLer to y- at least have just hang out with Connor Bedard when they draft him, or you know Arizona, the dumping ground where every player goes to retire. Like there are spots for him to land. And perhaps there's a team that sees something in Josh Bailey that they feel our system would work for his style. Maybe the style of play the Islanders play doesn't work for him, but I feel like, and not me, meaning the said general manager who's looking to acquire him. I feel like there's a place for him here. Albeit maybe it's in a limited role, but a role no less. So I understand, again, the history, the recent history with Josh Bailey. I understand, um, his decline, but I think one way or another, everyone's comments as a whole, yeah, I'm pretty sure he's played his last day as an Islander.
Oh, I think that, I mean, Lou also made that clear. It stinks because there was a period when being a Josh Bailey hater made you look like an idiot, but it
Yeah,
was a
that's
very
true.
brief, right? It was like 2 or 3 years and maybe a playoff run, bits and pieces of playoff runs where maybe he had a good game or he scored the overtime goal. I believe was that game 1 to the Island? Was that against Pittsburgh? Did he score that
Um,
that game 1 goal?
ah, I I feel like it was Jordan Eberle.
I just for some perspective here, in 1920 in the playoffs, he had 20 points in 22 games.
The way I heard that was the year 1920, not 2019-20 season.
He's 150 years old. Um, no, it's interesting that, and he had never had, I mean, they had never played more than 10 games before that. And then the next year, to 13 points in 19 games, which is still okay for what his, I guess a middle six guy. I mean, I don't remember if he was playing on the top line in 2021. Um, but 20 points in 22 games. I don't know about like the teams overall if he had the most points in that particular period. Yeah, he led. Oh my god, he led the team in scoring during that playoff run. That was 3 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember that actually. That was
And Bavilier had 14 and 22. Um,
that's post
yeah,
John Tavares. That's he's playing with who at that time? It was Bailey, it was the Killer Bees, Bailey, Bavillier, and Nelson. So
that probably sounds right. Although that top six was in a little bit of a blender.
yeah.
Um,
I think that was the only thing that remained of it, honestly.
yeah, but it's crazy that that wasn't that long ago, right? We're holding on to this team's those 2 runs, really like the 3 playoff runs. That first round sweep with the Penguins, and then the 2 runs after that to the conference finals. And yet this one player was such a lightning rod the entire time, no matter what. And you don't want to rewrite history. Like you want to accurately portray what happened. And one of those things, as frustrating as he is on a regular basis, that one run, that could have been it. He could have cemented himself as an Islander forever, and maybe we'd be speaking about it differently now if the team had made it to the final that year. And as a point per game guy, he may have been someone. I don't want to say it was like Conn Smythe, but he was vital to that team's run. Apparently, right? It's something we've all kind of written off and forgotten. At least I did. So it's interesting that this, he wasn't a 70-point guy or whatever it was, 71 points that
Right.
one season. It was such short lived where he was even a 50-point guy. It was 3 seasons in a row, and then the one where he's 71 before Tavares left, and where he was an all-star. And
Yep.
it's amazing how all that's changed in the seasons since then, that he's just been, terribly aggravating pretty much every time
He
he's on
might
the
be the
ice.
most polarizing player in this franchise's history.
That's interesting. Um, do you wanna pause on that? Or who else would be on that who else would be on that list as we sit here before the episode and wanna have a short show?
We might
Immediately
have
to
to we might have to marinate that one and come back to it with a little bit more research.
N I like it right at the top of the head, though.
Okay, give me a name.
Well, it's funny, this is like this is a lighthouse hockey conversation for Weird Islanders because it depends on, polarizing as long-term Islanders, polarizing as somebody that just showed up and left. Because I immediately think of, like, Ryan Smith or Thomas Vanek, who had very short stints, but were pretty polarizing. I guess it was because they left. They weren't polarizing, like, as a player itself. It's a really good question. Maybe we should marinate on it. I don't have anybody else.
In the way I see it is in terms of production, right? Has the moments where you're like, this guy's friggin' amazing, and then has the moments where you're like, what the fuck just happened? That's what I mean.
I'm trying to think of the Tavares years. Mostly because that's what I really remember as, like, an adult and, late teenager.
Fair.
I'm sure some older fans will have, more memories of perhaps some other players in the '90s, but the whole team was horse shit, so, like, doesn't after '94, so it doesn't really matter. But, maybe Yashin, he got bought
Yeah.
out. Rick DiPietro is probably
Yeah, that's a
another
good one.
one. Um, and again, this is like his body just couldn't keep up. It fell apart. He was really good. When he was playing, he was good. It wasn't that um, at the end he was playing like shit, but
Yeah.
for the most part, um, if he could have stayed healthy, I mean, he was an all star. He got one of his injuries was at the All Star game. He was the U.S. goalie in Italy in the Olympics in
Yeah.
2006. Like for other than like a really long playoff run or something like that, he was a top goalie for
I'll
a
even
second.
throw little bit sooner in the timeline. Ryan Strome. He had really good moments. You're like, wow, this guy's gonna be good. Then, you had these moments where you're like, who the fuck is this guy? Like, what the hell happened to the 50-point player in his first year or his second year? Why is he so shitty now?
Well, he
And
wasn't making that much money, right? I think that's where I got like Yashin, I got like DiPietro, I got like Bailey that are eating up a part of the cap and aren't producing like that part of the cap.
okay.
And it's just like it's just aggravating to watch
Yeah.
despite the flashes of what he could do. Even this season you saw it here and there where he was quite good at times, but it's just he could score a goal and then immediately put it into his own net. That's what it felt like watching him play. I frankly I did that the other night in beer league, but it's beer league and I don't get paid I pay to be there. It's a little bit different. Um so it's yeah, that's those are the type of players. I guess in the last 20 years, those would be the 3 that stand out to me. After 2011, it becomes a ragtag bunch. I think there was players like Oposo maybe. I don't wanna rewrite anything, like I said before. Nelson, where they had moments, but the team was so bad. There was nothing riding on the success, right? The teams with, like, DiPietro, Yash, and even now with Bailey, the teams are on the cusp of something, perhaps more now than then. Although this does, first round and out in 2 of the 4 runs or second round and out feels a lot more like the early 2000s with Laviolette and some of those guys and Osgood and DiPietro or whatever than it does the 2 conference final runs. But Yeah, I think when you're on the cusp of something, there's a lot more at stake, and you become a polarizing player because you're stopping the team from doing something. You're either really bad and you're eating up so much of the cap, and you were good at some point, and now you suck, or your team's on the cusp of something, and you're not allowing them to move forward. And that's where the Islanders are, frankly. They
Right.
have a $5 million. They just need to part ways with him. He's just not useful. They also have a plethora of those players in the lineup that they need to try to figure out a way to move on from. Ross Johnson, for example, who signed forever. Um, he'll wind up being the longest tenured Islander playing the least amount of games in NHL history. It's going to be amazing. Um, back to the presser, Sorokin is also mentioned in here. What does Lamoriello say? And we can dive in a little bit into, do you think a deal will get done, after July 1st, on or after July 1st?
Yeah. So he basically said in short, you know, he is eligible to sign a contract come July 1st, and yes, I'd like to get that done. Um, it wouldn't surprise me if he did. You look at the history: Matthew Barzell, Ryan Pulock, Adam Pelech. All these guys signed early. And they agreed to contracts because they wanted to be here. They agreed to take discounts because they wanted to be here. They agreed to long term because they wanted to be here. So it wouldn't surprise me at all to see Lamorello get that done, especially because he's been known to start building his teams from the net out. Goaltending is the most important position in hockey, but especially to Lou Lamorello. So he's openly stated, yes, he is eligible. Obviously, we all know that that's public knowledge because he becomes a free agent next summer. But he also admitted, yeah, I would like to get that done. So doesn't surprise me. Vezina candidate. He's in my opinion the best goaltender in the NHL right now. Um, why wouldn't you want to lock this guy down? I see a lot of discourse on Twitter. Trade him. You can get a haul. Who the hell's going to goaltend then? Like, you're not going to depend on Varlamov for 50 games. It's just not going to happen. Um,
Yeah, you
I'm
need to
not
save.
right. I'm not saying that he can't do it. I'm just saying you thought that you had a horrible season last season. Like, it's not going to be good if you let Sorokin go, and that's no slight to Varlamov. That's just you know Sorokin's just in a different stratosphere right now. Varlamov is an excellent 1B backup, if you will. He's great for 30 games, which I think they're gonna need him for next season. But Sorokin's gonna get you the bulk of the wins that you are looking to get. And that's not gonna be just for next season. That's gonna be for the foreseeable future. If they sign him to an 8-year deal, the conversation is, oh, how good is that contract gonna age? Look, there's yes, plenty of teams who sign players for 8-year contracts who know by year 5 this isn't going to be good, but they do what they have to do in the moment. Sorokin, however, has this freak athleticism that he has the opportunity to age gracefully. He's only going to be 27, or is he 27 already? He's going to be either 27, maybe 28. Um, I could see him lasting throughout that contract. It's not it's not far fetched. You know, the you're muted.
His
Marc Andre Fleury lasted. That's the way I see it.
up
So
and downs and things like
yeah,
that too. I
but
think
I think
with
that he's at his peak. I think he's better than Marc Andre Fleury ever was, and Marc Andre
well,
Fleury is fantastic. But
I mean, he recently, very recently won the Vezina. So let's hold until Sorokin has one under his belt, and he's nominated this year. So we'll see.
just pure skill.
Um, pure skill, it's possible. I want to see the wins. It's hard to say just on skill and athleticism, and I understand that, but I want to see um, I want to see him in the playoffs full time. We really haven't seen that. Varlamov was the goalie that brought the Islanders to those conference finals. I want to see Sorokin do it, and he's in the regular season. He's proven it, but the wheels came off a little bit. The Islanders in front of him did not help him against the Hurricanes this year, and he couldn't save him last year. And I have a question about some of that later, so I want to hold off there. But what I will say about Sorokin and a possible deal, I don't think you're worried if it's an 8-year deal. I really don't think you're worried about years, maybe even 5, 6, 7, 8. You're really just worried about the first half of that contract, which is going to be, he's in his prime or getting into his prime now with Barzell and Horvat's also 27. Um, you have some ish younger players, Dobson, whatever. That's really the window. Is I think Sorokin more so than Barzell and some of those other players. It's the next 4 years. You need to, as long as you have that goaltender, you can win playoff series. Again, I do want to talk about the construction of the roster on this year's playoffs and things in a second, but Sorokin is a key part of that. And if he has an 8-year deal, the next 4 years are critical. After that, he's in his, he's 32 plus. You never know. Things just start happening in your 30s, especially as a goaltender. It doesn't mean it can't happen. Look at Fleury. He's continuing to play great. He won the Vezina very late in his career. Um, but it'll be interesting to see if he can hold up playing that many games. Hopefully they're going on a bunch of playoff runs and and is playing a lot of hockey, but it does break you down a little bit. Speaking of the goalies, and some other players, and we'll get to the coaches in a second. I know it's a little bit out of order here for you, James, but said top. Lamoriello also said top priority is the team's UFAs: Parise, Engvall, Varlamov, and Mayfield. It sounds like he wants to bring all of them back, and probably the most, maybe the two polarizing players here are Mayfield and then Engvall in that order. Are you surprised that, if we're reading it correctly, that Lamoriello is planning to bring back Mayfield and not leave the spot open and the cap room to grab a puck moving defenseman?
No, I don't think he likes to leave anything to chance. I think he did that once, and he should consider himself lucky that it worked out, being that Sebastian Aho kind of took the spot this year and ran with it. It started with
At points, he was quite bad later in the season
yes.
and in the playoffs.
So it started with Robin Salo, a little Dennis Chalosky, then Sebastian Aho kind of took it and claimed it. Um, well stated from you. There were times where he wasn't good, but he was the best of what they had. So I don't think he wants to leave that to chance again. Um, so I ultimately think that he wants to bring Mayfield back because he doesn't want to be even thinner. But at the same time, they do need a puck moving defenseman. Covering the Devils for such a long time, I've been actually wondering about the possibility of Damon Severson. He's going to be one of the better UFAs this summer. And I do know that the Devils are possibly shopping his rights. So I do wonder if there's something there, not too far from Jersey, 27 years old, good puck mover, can put the puck in the net, can distribute from the blue line. I do wonder. So we'll see. But that's just my gut feeling. I do think that they need to address the defense though. And again, like it's so hard to do all of this. The cap's only moving up 1 million bucks. Like we said at the top of the show, they still need a winger. You have to address that. And is it Pierre Engvall? Frank Saravalli, he did this article where he projected, some of the top free agent, which is not very many top, quote unquote top free agents. It's a very thin crop this season or this offseason. But um, Pierre Engvall was part of that. Are you really going to pay this guy 4 by 4? Because that's what he was projected at.
I can't.
It's a
I've had
lot.
this. I'm playing my one of my beer league team for the summer. There's a couple Islander fans, strangely enough. I think it's because they're college kids, but we were talking about that and specifically, and I don't know about Engvall. You're not going to be able to get him on a short term deal, and if you are, it's going to be very expensive per year. 4 by 4 or even 4 by 3, they were really good. That line was
Yeah.
really good together. Are you really going to bank on that? Is that something
Right.
that you a part of me, I guess you ride the hot hand. What's the alternative? You're gonna overpay someone you don't know that also
Well, the
had,
fact of
that.
the matter is that he might be worthy of a 4x4, right? If he goes somewhere else, someone might pay him that. It's not about Pierre Engvall. It's about handcuffing yourself and not giving yourself the ability to upgrade where it's necessary, right? Pierre Engvall was great. He had chemistry with Brock Nelson and Kyle Palmieri, and that was a great line. You need to address the elephant in the room for the last 5 years. I understand they got Bo Horvat. I understand Matthew Barzell is now a winger, which Blue also did mention. Um, you still need someone to round out that line. Anders Lee can't do it anymore. He's going to be the next Josh Bailey, by the way. Okay,
Ooh,
it's
ooh.
that's not my opinion. That's just what I see. That's the discourse that I see. Fans are going to pin him as the next guy.
Well, what do you? I
Um,
mean, it is pausing on that for a second. Because that's that is spicy. I do want to know your thought in particular. I know you're kind of voicing a theme that you're seeing, but which is which is great, and that's what we're supposed to be doing. But do you see him as like, obviously he's different than a Joe Thornton in a lot of ways, but in San Jose, Thornton became this guy. Even though he's really good, he was putting up points, and I think Lee had 28 goals this season, if I'm not mistaken. So if he can stay at 25 goals and be a third liner and be the leader, especially as a core guy, and we're going to speak about that in particular later. But can he be that type of player, playing on the third line, being a leader, which is a lot
yeah,
more than what you see on the ice?
yeah.
Um,
Look at Kyle Okposo. Kyle Okposo plays on the fourth line for the Buffalo Sabres. He's
Anders Lee,
extremely effective there.
but Anders Lee is better than Poso at this
Oh no,
point.
no, 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 100%. The analogy is, can he be a leader in the bottom six? Yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
He
so
can
I
he
don't
can
think that.
absolutely be a leader on the ice, off the ice, in a bottom six decreased role. I have no doubts about that. I saw it in Kyle Okposo. He did wonders last year as a leader for the Buffalo Sabres, and he also played really well. If I'm not mistaken, I think he scored. Did he get to? Yeah, okay. He got 11 goals and 28 points on the fourth line. You take that.
Yeah, and Lee has been better than that, right? I think he's a 50-point
Oh,
guy
100%.
or a 60-point guy. I don't. Maybe the 60 is pretty high. 28 goals. I don't know how many assists he had. Maybe he only had 25 for he's a 50-point guy this season. But um, yeah, I don't mind that as for Anders Lee. We've
28
kind of,
goals, 22 assists, 50 points.
yeah, nailed it. So without even looking at it,
Nailed it.
yeah, uh, and I don't mind a Lee Peugeot asterisk with Peugeot. Do want to talk about him as well? Um, and a and a Wallstrom. I think that's an okay third line. Frankly, it's your top six, and if you're going to include Engvall in that with on the Islanders version of the perfection line with Engvall, Nelson, and Palmieri, they can recreate that. Which there's a part of me that just wants it, go year to year. I don't really care how long they're tied up for. Um, I just want to look at the team year to year. I know it's nice to know the good players are locked up, and it sucks when a player stinks and they're locked up for too long. But it's nauseating, and it's like it's too much. You're in one summer thinking about 2 summers from now. Uh, Other than when it's a guy like Sorokin, you understand. When it's Barzell or Dobson or whatever, you understand. But on a guy that it's a kind of a toss up. All right, he signed for 3 or 4 years. Who cares? Maybe I'm done. I'm thinking through it out loud here. Maybe you just live with it and see what happens. Um, the bigger thing that's going to move the needle, as you said, as we've said a couple times and other shows, and everyone's written about it, is they need a top line winger. So as long as it gives you the room to do that, if you're going to move around some other money, mostly being a Josh Bailey, because if that's the case and Engvall gets 4 by 4 and you move Bailey, you still have an extra million to deal with, right? Now you have a Parise to bring back, and you have a Varlamov who will hopefully come back for 2 by 2.5 or something to that effect, down from his $5 million, so that you gain 3 million there. Um, there's, are Martin and Martin and Clutterbuck going to come back? Can we see a fourth line of Parise, Cizikas, and Fashing, which would be pretty cheap at the end of the day? Um, so some moving parts here. Um, Behind the bench, Lou said that he and Lane are under contract, and that's how that will stay. Um, he did trip over a few words, saying he kind of had some doublespeak there, where he mentioned that that Lane will be back and the coaching staff will be back, but that maybe changes will happen. Or did you catch some of that? It made it sound like maybe some like the power play coaches or assistant or associate coaches maybe wouldn't be back as a complete staff. Maybe that's what Lamoriello was getting at. What did you hear versus what did he say?
Yeah, so it sounded exactly like that. Yeah. The he was remaining. Lane was remaining. Um Everything else was up in the air. And you know, him not committing to that makes me feel like there might be some changes. As you know, we've seen for a long time the power play needs some serious help. The penalty kill is actually pretty good, but for a long time the power play has just been really shitty. So I do wonder about changes there. The defense was definitely different. I don't want to say worse this year, but it was definitely different. And I don't know if it benefited them. There was a lot of changes there. So I wonder if Doug Huda is in question here. I think you just have to keep an open mind moving forward that there is the possibility that Huda and McLean might be on the outs here. And look, there's a lot of turnover going on right now around the NHL. Let's just say, for instance, and I don't know how well this would go over in the back of Lane's mind, but I wrote about this um, for the Devils because Andrew Brunette is now the head coach of Nashville. But there are people around the league who have been here a long time and have had really great success behind the bench. Let's just say, for instance, the trend continues with teams wanting to hire these new coaches, these young bloods that are eager to get into the league and they bring these great impacts. That's excellent. I think that should continue. However, Bruce Boudreau is still out there and available. I think that would be a pretty good idea to make him someone's associate. He has some serious hockey knowledge. He has some serious success. He has a serious resume. I think of all the active NHL head coaches right now, he actually has the best winning percentage.
Regular
Um,
season, yes. In the playoffs, he is a lot to be desired.
which is why maybe an associate role is best, right? He has some really good ideas. He brings a lot to the table in terms of system. He knows how to be personable with the players, and gain their trust and their respect, right? So I think that there is options out there as far as upgrades. Someone who can support Lane as a second year head coach, even that much better. You saw John Hines got let go from Nashville, obviously, and Andrew Burnett took his place. Right now, I think he's in contention for the Ranger job with Laviolette. If one of those two guys doesn't get a gig, why not? Why not? So there's options there, and I think someone, you know, I understand at the same time and in the same breath, someone might sit there and say, "Oh, Lane might be on his heels then, thinking that his successor is standing to his left or to his right." I get that, but you can't think that way, right? It's a business. You have to make the best decision for the team, and the best decision for the team might be bring in someone who's been there, done that, and get this guy some help. Because I look, no disrespect to Doug Huda, no disrespect to John McClain, I just don't think that they were it.
I mean, it's very clear that there were some issues there, and I think it's interesting to bring in some new voices if it's not going to be Lane Lambert as that new voice, and that was what we heard last year, that he was going to be, quote, someone new behind the bench, even though he had been there. It'd be interesting to kind of surround him with additional experience, and you're seeing with other teams how successful like the Devils were this year with Burnett behind behind the bench, and then he immediately becomes a coach. You don't want a constant carousel of coaches in and out because they're too good and you can't, do anything. And that was one of the reasons it sounded like that Lambert was promoted, was because they were going to lose him, and he was clearly an asset to the team. I think it's still up in the air as far as letting Trotz go, and that mutual, I guess, breakup there. Now that he's clearly in a spot that he wants to be in Nashville, that Barry Trotz is general manager. Is he the president and general manager? I can't remember. Anyway, he's in Nashville and has his guy in Andrew Burnett. Yeah, I think it's a really good question to ask, to see how they can round out that coaching staff in a way that actually benefits the team in more ways than maybe that we're thinking. We saw some kind of breakdown this season where they couldn't focus before games and things like that. I think there was a huge communication leadership problem, and that comes from behind the bench. And a lot of that is on the players themselves to kind of get up for it. You'd think that they are just professionals; they can just show up every day, but everybody needs encouragement and all that kind of stuff, and you need your leaders to be leaders on the ice and behind the bench. So maybe it wouldn't hurt to have some good experience back there in maybe a different way. Lane's been around a long time, but I think Bruce is an interesting player, a character rather, to kind of insert into the
Yeah.
Islanders organization.
Yeah, the
Um,
thing is, again, like, you want true new voices, bring in somebody brand new, brand spanking new. And that doesn't mean that Lane has to, lose his voice. That doesn't mean that Lane has to, um, you know, give up his share of the responsibility. It just means new ideas, something different.
yeah, and they definitely need that on the power play at the very least. So whoever comes in, um, maybe it's a former player, maybe I don't know what really goes into that as being an associate coach and what other aspects of the game that they're running. But I think as far as the offense and the power play go, they could really stand to have a new voice and kind of maybe inspire these players to play a little bit differently here.
Yeah.
Um, we're gonna wrap up the first half here with Alexander Romanov and Oliver Wahlstrom. Um, sounds like Romanov had surgery and is going to be ready for camp. Wahlstrom is also going to be ready for camp. Um, and the way that he was speaking about Wallstrom made it sound like he's pretty confident that a deal is gonna get done. Is that what you kind of concluded from that as well?
Yeah. Yeah. I think so. And, you know, I think Walsham probably understands he can't command that much. Given, he got injured, given that he had his growing pains the season prior. So there is probably that feeling of, okay, I'm rested, I'm recovered from a brutal couple of years, not just personally but overall. Um, he did say, and he was very confident in his exit interview back in April about how he felt revitalized. He learned a lot, he matured a lot in this process of healing. I could see him saying to himself, "I'm going to bet on myself this year." And look, he might be right. You know, there was something about the way he was talking about it being a blessing in disguise that he got hurt. Um, Giving him that time to reflect on himself as a player and what he needs to do to better himself. So, I wouldn't be surprised to see a motivated, revitalized Oliver Wahlstrom come out next season on a prove it contract and score, what I've said for a couple of years now. He's got a 30 goal potential. I could see it. So,
He's got a
um,
lot of work to do.
oh no,
I
he
think,
100%.
positionally and defensively, I think just because he can shoot well. And look, he played 37 games and he had 5 goals. Um,
Yeah, right.
it has a lot more to do with, and the guy's got a lethal shot. There were
Oh,
times,
for sure.
look, Simon Holmstrom. too many Strums on this team, and in the Islanders' history, I can't keep them all straight. Simon Holmstrom um, was another one where he had these flashes, but what did he have? 10 points, 14 points, something like that. You have to find a way to do something consistently. If you're going to be a half a point a game player, do that, right? Don't show up for 10 games in a row and then you're a ghost for 30 and you had 15 points in 10 games and then you disappear. I don't really care that you had 15 points in 10 games. If you can't do it on a regular basis, it's irrelevant. And that's a pretty good clip, better than a point a game. Um, but a quarter of a game, a quarter of a point a game player is unless you're on the fourth line, doesn't matter. And Wallstrom has aspirations to be much higher in the lineup than the third line. But like I said, I think Lee, Peugeot, Wallstrom would be a pretty good third line. He'd have his guy in front of the net. He'd have someone defensively reliable in Peugeot, and they'd get. I think, as I said a couple of years ago, you and I had this conversation about Wallstrom. It's probably going into this season, maybe about him being on the first line, or maybe last season, 2 years ago rather, about him playing with Barzell. And I said, my biggest knock against Wallstrom is he doesn't have a lot of experience, and playing with a guy like Barzell means he's playing against the other team's top defenders and defensive forwards. So that's probably not a recipe for success. And you saw him not succeed in the top six anywhere. So keeping him down further in the lineup, get some confidence, get some reps, get your 15 minutes a night, whatever you're going to get, and do something with it. Prove that you can move up in the lineup, score some power play goals, get your cookies on the power play, earn that spot. Hopefully the coaches see that you're shooting the puck and you're shooting well, and it's the goals are going to come, but you got to do it. You have to show up. And 6 points in whatever 30 something games is not going to cut it. He didn't show enough outside of those moments when he scored a goal to say, wow, okay, this guy's going to be something. To me, he didn't show it. So he's got some work to do. We're going to step away for 1 second, and we'll be right back with a couple more segments here. I know we're about an hour in, but we'll be back on the other side.
Nassibin Hockey is brought to you by DraftKings. Light the lamp during the hockey playoffs with DraftKings Sportsbook. New customers can make a $5 bet and score $200 in bonus bets instantly. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code THPN. That's code THPN at DraftKings Sportsbook. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In Massachusetts, call 800-327-5050 or visit gamblinghelpma.org. In New York, call 877-8-HOPENY or text HOPENY. In Kansas, call 1-800-522-4700. On behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort, 21 plus in most eligible states, but age varies by jurisdiction. Eligibility restrictions apply. See DraftKings.com/sportsbook for details and state-specific responsible gambling resources. Bonus bets expire 7 days after issuance. Eligibility and deposit restrictions apply. Terms at sportsbook.draftkings.com/hockey terms.
So I want to talk a little bit more about the Islanders offseason, but in a general sense. I think we'll wind up getting into some specifics here, but looking at the playoffs this year and the teams that made it, and I assume you've been watching the final, it's been nasty.
Yep.
And it's a copycat league. I'm sure if you listen to any amount of shows, you will have heard that um, from other folks as well. But I think it applies here um, with how tough the playoffs have been. Are the Islanders really built for that? I have a thought for because I think this is complicated and nuanced. And without looking at my notes that I have in there, um, what do you think truly? Like,
Yeah,
not
I think so. I absolutely think so. This is they're built for the playoffs. This is what we've said all along. They're built for it. They're not necessarily built to get there. So um, look, if you're taking the team that was this year, right? Let's say they got this deep into the playoffs, would they be able to hang with how nasty it's been? Yeah, you kidding me? Cal Clutterbuck will go out there with no hands if he has them chopped off somehow, and find a way to take your skate off and beat you with it. Like it's not a question. You know, Casey Zizekas, Matt Martin, like those guys they're all playing. They're all on the fourth line still. If you're using this year's roster, right? Hudson Fashing, I think he has it. JG Pageau, I think he has it. If Oliver Walsham was healthy, he's got some snarl. Um,
He could be a Matthew Tkachuk.
he could be,
Maybe not
not
quite 100 points,
let's not
but
get clipped here and have this clip go viral for being quote unquote stupid. He has the essence of what Matthew Tkachuk brings to the Panthers.
I
Okay, he
I
is
appreciate
not
that.
Matthew Tkachuk 2.0.
Yeah, and that was not my intention. That was the rest of my that was essentially the rest of my thoughts. So I appreciate you read my mind a little bit.
You're welcome. But yeah, he has that snarl in him. So, yeah, I absolutely think that they have it in them to, if they could get this deep in the postseason, play like that, because I think that fits their style.
So this is where I want to dive in. So I'm really happy that you kind of led me right where I thought you'd lead me. I think that the team has some work to do around the edges. You need to figure out your bottom six. R. Martin and Clutterbuck coming back, yada yada yada. I think regardless, I think Parise brings a little bit of that bite too, and obviously he can score goals. I think Fashion can do that, as you said, Lee and Peugeot, and I think there's plenty of players that can do that. And maybe you do keep one, or if you can get rid of Johnson, you can keep one or both of Clutterbuck and Martin around if you can afford it for these types of instances. But what I will say is, I think this team is built for later in the playoffs. So round 2, 3, and 4, they need some of that scoring to get themselves out of the first round. Because what we saw, if you go back and look at those first round series in against the Penguins, against the Capitals, and against, oh God, was that Boston in the first round the following year in
Hmm.
21? Wow. Anyway, whoever they played, they scored a lot of goals in those first round series. They played very well defensively, but they were able to score goals. The later it went on, the less goals they scored. And it's because the players are tired. The game slows down a little bit. Every single game you get further and further into the next round, into the next round. Everything slows down. It gets tougher. And ultimately, if the Islanders can get out of the first round, is when I think they can actually go and run with it, right? They can do what the Panthers just did. But and Carolina, look, they were able to score goals in that first round and make it out, but they couldn't really play that tough game and ultimately hang with Florida.
Yeah,
I
I
think that was
think
a
it.
closer series, and to somewhat to Brendan Moore's point, although he did say we didn't really get swept or whatever he said, you did and you lost and it's whatever. But the same with the Islanders got swept by Carolina a few years ago. It is what it is. But ultimately, Florida was able to wear them down in certain ways, and that's what the Islanders did a few years ago. They wore these teams down, specifically in that Tampa series, where they weren't able to score goals, but they were able to kind of chip away and really get within one shorthanded goal of at least one cup final. And game 6, that's a close series. So I think that Carolina Panther series was closer than what the 04 said, which is probably what Brendan Moore should have just said. But
Yeah, I think
that's
too.
where I think with this team, that like they need to be able to get out of the first round, which means they need a little bit of being a better regular season team, carry that into the first round, score some goals, get a save. Then the rest of the way, I'm confident. I'm much more willing to kind of say, okay, the roster, even with another winger, a puck moving defenseman, that's it. Like yes, those are kind of big asks, but you're not asking to completely retool his team at the moment.
I think too, and I can't take credit for this. I heard it somewhere else. I just can't put my tongue on where. Um, there was a good point made that if you go back X amount of years, it had to be. It was a while. Um, no, no Stanley Cup winner didn't have at least one round in the playoffs where They didn't necessarily have quote unquote easy games because there's no easy games in the playoffs, but they had a round where it ended in like 4 or 5. They dominated that, that series, and they got the proper rest. I think that's really important, when observing the history of the playoffs versus who's winning now. You look at, the Panthers, they won in 4 against the Hurricanes, right? Now, are they winning the cup right now? No, but they had that series where they won 4 and they got to the dance. So I think that's important to observe. The fact is,
That's been a problem for a lot of teams. That was a big problem for the Islanders sweeping the Penguins and
well, and
having
that's my point.
all that time off, and then they wind up losing. Um,
Right, that's my point. So you have to find that sweet spot where it's the perfect amount of time off, where it's just enough to recover, but you don't want that recovery to turn into rust. Um, but at the same time, you got to make sure you get that rest, because if you go from one 7 game series to another 7 game series to another 7 game series, by the time you get to the cup, if you get there, you're gassed. And the other team, let's say they, had a couple of days between, first series to the next, and they're next up for you, and they're a little bit more well rested. That's where, although you can probably play that style of game that is so heavy, and it is so physical, you're gonna run out of gas quicker than your opponent. So there's a lot of factors. Like it's so easy to sit there and say like, oh yeah, they could play like that, but there's so many more factors that go into how to win this anomaly that is the NHL playoffs, because anything could friggin' happen. It's actually crazy. I mean, we're sitting here on June 6th talking about a Vegas Florida Stanley Cup final. Vegas at the beginning of the season, sure, sign me up. I could see them there. You know what? Not even the beginning. Sorry, midway through the season, yes, sign me up. I could see Vegas there. To say the Panthers were going to be there, to say the Panthers were going to beat the Bruins down 3-1, albeit in the first round. Like, the playoffs are such a, like, anything goes. But there's so much that goes into the perfect storm that is winning the Stanley Cup. It's just not as cut and dry as you might think it is.
the Islanders and the Panthers have a lot of similarities. I don't know enough about the
They do.
Panthers to say that, and I'm sure the Panthers might even be a little bit better. Um, Bobrovsky's been playing out of his mind up until the final. He did get pulled in game 2. Sorry for the spoiler if you DVR'd that. Um, you're hearing this 2 days after. I believe there's game 3 is at least the day that we're releasing this. But the Islanders beat some really good teams on the way on their runs. They also beat Boston. I think they were maybe a little bit injured, but nothing terrible if memory serves. Someone correct me if I'm wrong. I'm sure you won't hesitate. But I think the Panthers also were able to do that
Yeah.
on this run. I think Toronto, there's just no bite to that game, and the stars don't show up, and when it really matters, and that's why they're going through what they're going through. Um, but yeah, they looked like they made pretty easy work. In between losses was almost like a month for the Panthers. They'd lost whatever the last game they had lost against the Bruins. They lost game 4 against Toronto, and they just like didn't lose. They swept the next series. It took a week or so, and then before the final, it felt like forever in between. They had 2 losses in 6 weeks. It seemed like probably not that long, but like in a really long time. And I don't know if the Islanders are quite that lucky, but on their runs, but I think that proves a little bit of a point with what you said. They were able to kind of get through, and each of those runs, they didn't really, when they made quick work of the Penguins, they didn't make it very far. Although they did beat the Capitals in 5 in the bubble, and then move on to beat, I believe, the Flyers.
Man,
Um,
all these years have just blended together. It's so hard to remember.
yeah, I only remember. Yeah, I remember there was a second round where it was the Flyers, and I think it was that first year in the bubble, only because you and I were at Oyster Bay Brewing and we were watching that game.
That is true.
We got some Blue Line Deli,
Yes, we did.
and brought it down the street to Oyster Bay Brewing Company and watched the game. I believe they lost that particular one, but they did win the series. Thomas Price to the rescue. Um, this has been a big topic with Toronto and now Dubas in Pittsburgh, and we're not going to get into that, but I'm going to make it about the Islanders. Um, a lot's been made of the core four. That's been a lot of the conversation. Dubas getting to Pittsburgh, talking about Letang, Crosby, Mike Sullivan as the coach, and Letang and Malcolm, whatever. The four of them, the Leafs, blah blah blah. Can they keep them together? Who are the Islanders' core four? And beyond that, is this the last run? Like, is this truly the last gasp for
No.
players that we've been really holding on to? And I'm not talking about Barzell necessarily, but maybe thinking a little bit beyond that to like a 6 or 7 that includes like a Nelson and a Pellick and a Pulak and an Anders Lee, as you alluded to a
The
little
core
bit.
four, the core four is simple. It is Barzell and it is Horvat because their 8-year deals kick in. It is Brock Nelson because he's your most consistent player uh, with elite talent. And it is Ilya Sorokin.
Dobson
Those are,
not in that mix.
Dobson is not in that mix. If you can only pick four, is he part of the core? Yes. Is he part of the core four? No,
As the
not right
most
now.
important
Anyway,
players to the Islanders.
most important players right now are for overall success: Barzell, Horvat, Nelson, and Sorokin. We've seen we've seen the Islanders be successful while Noah Dobson hasn't been. They just did it.
I mean, we've also seen the team make it to the playoffs without Barzell.
Yes, but that's because they had Bo Horvat. If they didn't have Bo Horvat, they would not they would not be there. And I
I
understand
can
Bo Horvat was not scoring. However, he did literally everything else. Right? Someone's got to do it. And without him being there, Brock Nelson maybe doesn't score as much as he does. Maybe Pierre Engvall doesn't, find that lightning in a bottle. Kyle Palmieri, so there's, in my opinion, no Horvat. Islanders do not have the success they do. Um, Look, Barzell's the highest paid player on the team. He's got to be, he's got to be part of the core four. He has to perform.
I think that's kind of where I would have put maybe Dobson in over someone like Nelson just because he's younger, but I understand your argument here for that. And thinking a little bit wider beyond just 4 players, like I said, maybe you include Dobson, Pelican, Pulak, and Anders Lee in that. You said that this wasn't the last gasp for this group. Why
Yeah,
why do
but
you
because
just
the
I mean, you could trade anybody. I don't buy that as an excuse just because of contracts. So I want to
okay,
know.
so
There's got to be another reason.
this maybe I'm hearing the question wrong. I'm saying this is not the way I hear that is, are they going to blow it up? Is that what you mean?
Well, what rebuild? I mean, blow it up is extreme. I don't
All
know.
right. So for instance, I take into consideration what happened today, right? The Columbus Blue Jackets acquired Ivan Provorov. Um, they shook things up, right? Can they shake things up? Certainly. I could see them at some point, maybe next summer, if things don't go the way they are planning for them to go in 23-24. I can see them trading Brock Nelson, right? They're not going to trade. Now,
They're not
that
going to do
would be a
that this
shakeup
season.
to the core four, right?
And that's so. I mean, there's some crossover there. I think it's either 4 or somebody included in that larger group,
Mm,
whether they're in the 4 or not. Right. So it could be Nelson. It could be whomever. We saw that. I asked this question a little bit because we've seen Bailey, notwithstanding as a core player, just because he really has not been that important to this team, since that playoff run where he had 20 points in 22 games. Um, how can the team ultimately move forward without doing something like that? And they did that with Bavilier, right? They moved on from a player that was part of what you thought the core was, or the just outside of that ring of the, and now that in these particular terms that we're calling it now in the core four, because someone mentioned that to me. We were going back and forth on Twitter as you do. Back when I was, people were posting things about where the team goes and blah blah blah. And I said, I think we're just going to be back here next year with having the same conversation. Then they're going to try to run it back. But at that point, you simply can't just say, okay, see you next April. Right. Because that's kind of
Right.
where we were having that conversation after the locker cleanout day is, yeah, I mean, are we just not going to have the conversation? Like, take the whole year off of the podcast. Great. We don't have to write anything. I don't have to be on Twitter. I don't have to read anything. I don't have to watch the games. I'll see you after the first round exit next year. We won't have learned anything. And then the real party will start. Unless, a major move or two notwithstanding, um, even with that, is there a shakeup of some kind coming after this season if they have another season like they just did? And I don't know how many more
Yeah.
times you can say, "Oh, it was injuries," and "Oh, this guy," and this. At a certain point, you can't just be like, "Oh, the last 3 years we've had a lot of injuries and we were on the road once." That can't
Yeah.
be it,
So
right? That's not gonna work forever.
right. I 100% think that if this season doesn't go, or 23-24 doesn't go as anticipated, you could definitely see a shakeup. Well, like I started to say earlier, it wouldn't surprise me if they trade a Brock Nelson, who is part of the core four that I just named. Because one, he can net you something in return, but two, if it's not working, something has to change. They're not going to trade,
I mean, you think
Matthew.
that.
They're not going to trade Matthew Barzell and Bo Horvat, who are going to have 7 years remaining on those deals. It's not going to happen. They're
And
not going to
after this
trade it.
season, Nelson has 1 year left,
Right. So
and Lee
he
will
makes
have
no
2.
sense. Right.
Yeah, I think at that point it's a little bit different. Pajot has 2 years left after that. Um, Depending on if the cap goes up at all, who knows with Gary Bettman. Um, it's going to go up 1 million this year. Who knows what they'll argue next year? It could only be 2, just because of who knows what. Um, yeah, I mean, after the season, I think is when, which I'm willing to give it almost 1 more year. It pains me to say that. They just have to do something this summer. I don't think it could just be run it back and figure some stuff out around the edges.
Right. Now, again, I understand what Lamoriello said today. The generic responses, the status quos. You just don't know. With him, especially, you just don't know. He says that today. He could wake up tomorrow to email or text message saying so and so is available. What do you think? And you know, maybe he pulls a rabbit out of a hat. Typically, his time to shine is the trade deadline or leading up to it. It's not typically in the summer, but
This year, the UFA class, like you said, is very thin, and
exactly.
this could be his time to shine.
This could be the year of the off season of the trade rather than the sign because I personally, the only unrestricted free agent coming from a different organization that I think the Islanders should go after, if he gets there, is Damon Severson. They need a puck mover. Make that happen. How? I don't know, because he's going to command a chunk of change. But I think that he's the only guy on the market that is worth looking out for them.
I do want to bring up one player. I know we're getting late, and you have a little bit of a schedule, so we'll end on something mildly interesting here that I think you'll definitely have 2 cents on. Alex DeBrincat.
Yep.
I believe he's an RFA.
Yep.
There's some discussions out of Ottawa that he either may not want to be there, they might not
Yep.
want him there. He had a
Yep.
disappointing season. Yeah, 27 goals, 39, 66 points in 82 games, off
So
of
disappointing.
a career high. I don't know what the actual deal was. Maybe he's just not happy there. Um, Maybe it's just not working. I don't know. He's nearly a point a game guy in his career, coming off a career high 78 points in 82 games. 2 years ago now, 2 seasons ago. Is that somebody now
Yes.
he had a four $6.4 million AAV, coming off a 3-year deal that he signed with the Blackhawks. Is that somebody
Yes.
again, as an RFA, you make that trade, you figure it out,
Yes.
and
40 goals twice. And it wasn't just because of Patrick Kane. You
yeah,
go get that guy. And by the way, who plays stylistically like Patrick Kane? Come on,
yeah,
Matthew freaking Barzell. Go get that fucking guy.
yeah, DeBrincat, Horvat, Barzell would be something. A hell of a time for Brennan Burke and Butch Goring to say every single night, DeBrincat to Horvat. But yeah, I think that name stuck out to me as somebody that you figure out how to make that trade, and it might hurt. That might mean Wallstrom, a prospect, and a pick, and he's an RFA, right? But
Yeah.
you got to clear that space somehow. You got to figure that out. Um, but he is 25. I think he's in a space where you make that trade and you give up a little, kind of like
Yeah.
Romanov, right? You kind of figure that out. And the Islanders, I can't remember what their draft things. Yeah, they don't have their own first round pick this year. Um, I don't know. I think you try to figure it out. Ottawa's on the up and up. Um, so it'd be surprising to me that they don't try to get something done. I didn't really read anything. I just know that DeBrincat out of Ottawa is a thing that's happening, or a thing that's being discussed,
Potentially happening. Yeah.
potentially happening. So I wanted to make sure to at least touch on that a little bit, because that seemed like one of those trade moves that is almost like a signing, because you need to, I think, as Lamoriello tends to do, he would have a deal in place specifically for a player like this. But as you said, former 40 goal scorer, um, had a quote down season after last year. It's not like the Islanders have a ton of prospects to give up, but I think if you go the route of a Wallstrom or something like that, and that's what you do, I think that's completely worth it in this case. Um, he's, I think, exactly what this team needs. It would definitely be one of the bigger signings. I know we just got Horvat, but a 40 goal scorer, that didn't do it with this team almost 10 years ago, it seems like, Andersley, um, and Nelson for that matter. It would just be an enormous ad. And it wouldn't be, for instance, trying to trade for somebody like Hoffman, who was on our list some time ago. That would be a depth move you make at the deadline. That's not a summer move. So you can kind of you can start to separate some of those guys, at least on our wish list anyway, who you would want to sign now, trade and sign now, who you would want to trade for at the deadline. We've also talked about Ehlers and Kyle Connor, out of Winnipeg. That could also be an interesting option, depending on what they need to give up. Um, Part of me thinks you go with the Brincat, frankly, over both of them, because he's younger, even younger than Connor, um, and you have control over the dollar amount. So you can give him a bridge. You can do whatever you want with the Brincat. Maybe keep the years low, AAV high. See what happens getting to the island. Can he get back to that 30+ goal pace that he was on for 2 seasons? Um, geez, almost he's over a point a game player in the shortened season, but that's still something, playing in that Central Division. Um, any other thoughts as you wrap up here?
No, just it's it's gonna be interesting. It's hard to sit here and say that they're gonna run it back again. Kind of feels like they're gonna run it back. I don't know. I'm kind of just going into this summer with an open mind. Like I don't take anything at face value anymore. I hear what they say in the press conferences, and I think I've seen and learned enough now to know that sometimes, or lots of times, I would say more than half the time, someone will say something on the podium and then do something completely different, just because it's things change. and fast. We just saw it with Kyle Dubas. You saw Kyle Dubas say, "You will not see me as the general manager of another team next week." And then 2 weeks later, president of hockey operations in the Pittsburgh Penguins organization. So things changing fast. He said what he said today. Could be different tomorrow.
That's true, and he doesn't let Lamoriello doesn't show his cards. So who really knows what's happening until it happens? And we've said that a million times.
Yeah.
Let's wrap up this episode. We'll see you again next week with two special guests, and we're excited to have this conversation with them and learn a little bit about it. They'll have, I'm sure they'll have some interesting thoughts for us a week after marinating on them. Please rate, review, subscribe wherever you listen to or watch the show. You can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Nassman Hockey. You can find James's work at New Jersey Hockey Now, and at the fourth period. He's
True.
maintaining. We'll see what happens with that. I know you're cooking up some things there,
Yep.
some radio appearances and whatnot. So that'll be great. And make sure to check out Isles Fix. I saw Joe post before that he's going to do an interesting little thing about the Lou Presser. So if you're listening to this on Wednesday, go subscribe. I think maybe you get a week free or something like that. Go check it out, sign up. Definitely deserves your support. And get that newsletter throughout the summer. Catch up on all the news alongside NHP and all of your other favorite Islanders media or whatever our equivalent of media is here at NHP. James, bring us home.
Until next time, all. Let's go Islanders.